Okay, Lou, you can start whenever you're ready.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is another in a series of informational meetings that we're having with with organizations around the city of Yonkers as we talk about the HOME-ARP money that's been made available to the city of Yonkers, and we're getting input from various developers.
Lou, you're cutting out, at least for me.
Oh. Everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. And we're looking to explain the process. What are the eligible activities? What are the eligible expenses for this money? And we've invited Carl Bertrand here today, who is a consultant for the city and will be spearheading this project for us. And Carl is here to explain the next steps, the reporting requirements, what's due at HUD at a certain time, probably in the first quarter of the new year, and how each of you and the input that you're able to provide to us will help us put together that that report on the best ways to be able to spend this money with the federal government going forward. So, Carl, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carl Bertrand. Glad to be with you today. So Yonkers received $4.6 million in a special home allocation that was funded through the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So unlike other federal grant programs, this is never going to be repeated. This is one-time funding. And that's the entire allocation that Yonkers is going to get. They can spend it all in 6 months, or they could stretch it out over a little over 7 years. All of the funds nationwide have to be spent by September 30th, 2030. So they could invent a 7-year program or a 1-year program or both with different parts of the money. The funds can be used for creation or preservation of affordable housing. That's why we're talking to you all today. Tenant-based rental assistance, services, anything that could be funded by a HUD Continuum of Care grant, a HUD Emergency Solutions grant, or a HUD Fair Housing Counseling grant is eligible to be funded through this program. And purchase and development of non-congregate shelter. So those are the 4 possible activities. We're asking for your suggestions today about how you could use the money. We're particularly interested in your input on the creation or preservation of affordable housing, because you're the local experts in that. So as one part of its public participation process, we're inviting local groups like you to give us suggestions for what could be included in the plan. The next step is that the city has to draft a plan to HUD that describes the general activities it's going to do, like how much money is it going to allocate for each of those 4 activities, and then how specific uses will later be selected, say by an RFP process, and very importantly, which populations will be given preference. So as I'll go through in detail, there are 4 different populations eligible for HOME-ARP funds, and unless the initial plan specifies otherwise, any project that gets HOME-ARP funding has to be open to all 4 populations and take them in the order that they apply. No other preference allowed, unless that preference is described in the plan. So we're going to wind up asking you, who are you? How much money would you like? What activity would you use it for? And very importantly, which populations of the 4 qualifying populations would you serve? Because we have to describe the best way to do that. The way the HUD has structured it is we give a preference to, say, currently homeless and domestic violence survivors. Then we have to justify that in our plan in terms of the need, and then our lawyers have to vet it to make sure that it doesn't violate any fair housing or civil rights laws. So we're going to ask you who you could serve out of the groups that are potentially eligible. If you could serve all of them, then it's easy. We don't need to write in a preference for you. The 4 qualifying populations are homeless, very broadly defined, at risk of homelessness, very broadly defined, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence and human trafficking is another part of that. And then other populations, which include people who have like a time-limited subsidy that's running out, who need more services, or people who are very low income and are severely housing cost burdened. That has a lot of specific definitions too. There are about 5 pages that define the specifics of these 4 populations, and I'll talk about that. We'll go through those so you have a sense. So it gives us unparalleled ability to serve previously neglected or underserved populations. But if you want to serve a particular group, we need to know that now. What we're doing is we're asking local experts and agencies like you to give us suggestions. And we're going to ask you for a paragraph describing what you would like to do. And a few days later, a little bit of need data justifying the population if you want to serve. We're not asking for a lot of detail. My guess is that the city will get requests for 4 or 5 times what it can afford to fund. And I'm basically going to make a list of those paragraphs and ask the city, which of these do you want me to draft a plan that it could potentially accommodate them? So maybe if there were 20 requests, they would say, make it possible for these 10 to proceed. And then these 10 would be eligible for an RFP. I'd need to group them into buckets. The city would decide how much money to put into each of the 4 buckets for those 4 activities. And then if you needed preferences, I need to write those into the plan. That one project, one of the things we'll give preference for in tenant-based rental assistance would be domestic violence survivors. And we'd give 10 extra points on the RFP for someone who applied for that. Might be the kind of thing that gets built in. But the only way to make sure the door stays open for you to eventually get this money is to define the target populations, which are the qualifying populations you would serve, and that we would give a preference for it. So they're not going to be deciding who finally gets the money, but they're going to be deciding how to structure a general plan that makes it possible for a larger than $4.6 million group to continue to the next stage of the competition. Any questions about that? I'll go through them all, but let's go ahead to the next slide, which is what we need from you, which is not a lot. Step 1, give us a 1-paragraph suggestion that says you'd like blank amount of money. A suggestion is do it in increments of $250,000. You could ask for the whole 4.6 million, but that means the county needs to, the city needs to document all the different types of housing needs for all these different populations, and then conclude that this one project is the only answer Yonkers needs. It's possible, but less likely than that the city would try to do a couple of major projects. So you'd have a better shot of getting funded, I think, my guess, is if you ask for $500,000 or $1 million or something like that. Yeah, the step 2 is you give us some need for it. Now, the thing you need to know for affordable housing development is you could ask for this money for capital upfront, or you could ask for it to be put into a fund where you can use it for rent subsidies for the tenants over a period as long as up to 7 years. My guess you can ask for whatever you want and whatever you need. My guess is the city would rather have a capital project that it could fund and be done with in 2 years or 3 years, rather than stretch out for 7. The other problem is, the longer you stretch out the money, the fewer people you can serve. So you could serve 5 people for 5 years or 25 people for 1 year, or that's the kind of slide bar that you're using. The other thing you need to know is there is a requirement in this funding that any unit that is assisted has to be available to the populations as defined in our plan for 15 years. So if you got money for, if you got $500,000 in capital for a large housing project, you might not want to spread it over the whole project. You might want to say that we're going to use it for 10 units out of that larger project. And then those 10 units have the 15-year requirement that they have to be open to the populations as specified in our plan. Now, here's another thought, particularly for y'all. So one of the populations is currently homeless. Another one is domestic violence. And then I believe some of the at-risk are all eligible for a New York State grant called the New York State Empire State Supported Housing Initiative, ESHI. And what that does is give you $25,000 per unit for 5 years at a time, expected to last for 20 years, for new housing that gets created after the grant is submitted. So what you could do is ask for $500,000 or $1 million of this for capital, and then ask for ESHI to get funding to make it affordable going forward for those same units. And it works better in combination where you have a capital source and the operating source together for the same units than it is to try to get everything you need from this one grant. But this could be part of it. And if there's part of the capital or pre-development money or something like that that is hard for you to get funded, that would be an ideal use for this. But it's pretty flexible. If y'all have, there's a definition of affordable housing. I haven't looked at it. You all probably have a better sense of the way HUD uses that than I would. But there's a link in here to the rules that have all the details. The main thing is, do you have a project that's could be finished in the next few years to either sustain or create affordable housing? And how much money would you like, and how many units could you dedicate to this program? Now, I can go into all the details of the populations, but does anybody have any questions before we go on to that? Okay, it's a unique program. Let me get to the sorry. Too many windows open.
Carl, do you want to do the definitions first, or do you want to touch upon the timeline?
Let me do the definition some, and then we'll come back to the timeline. So the first population is homeless. And so that's everybody who's on the streets or in the shelter counts. Can you all see the definitions now on your screen?
No, we're not. You're not. The screen share is not working.
Okay. You see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So the first of the 4 qualifying populations are homeless. That includes everybody who's in a shelter, people who are going to be evicted in the next 14 days and don't have another place to go, youth under age 25 and families with youth who don't qualify under that definition, but who qualify as homeless under McKinney-Vento. If they haven't had a lease in the last 60 days, they've moved twice or more, and basically couch surfing would count as homeless. And then at risk of homelessness, a second population is if you have an income below 30% of area median income and you've moved twice in the last 60 days, you're doubled up living with friends or relatives, you're being evicted in 21 days, you're living in an overcrowded unit, you're exiting an institution or system of care, like aging out of foster care, runaway children, couch surfing teens. The third population is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking is another one. That's pretty straightforward. The fourth one is other populations. The first subset of that are families who need services or housing assistance to prevent homelessness. A good example of that would be that there are people who are in HUD-funded rapid rehousing programs who only have a subsidy for 24 months, and then they're going to become homeless if they haven't raised their income yet. So you could provide additional services to raise their income, or you could extend the subsidies with this funding. And then the last one, at greatest risk of housing instability, if you have annual income that's 30% or less of area median income, and you are severely housing cost burdened, then you are eligible. There are probably hundreds of families in Yonkers that would qualify under that paragraph alone. Or if you're below 50% of area median income and you move 2 or more times, you're doubled up with someone, you're going to be leave in 21 days, you're overcrowded, leaving a system of care, etc. So that's the 4 populations. Any questions about that? Let me go back to the timing now. So I'm not adept as I should be at. Preliminary timeline of next steps. So we're asking for your suggestions by the middle of October. And then the plan would get drafted for the planning department review by late October, early November. Local officials would decide if that's the plan they want to submit. We'd release it for public comment, have a public comment period, and our hope is to get the plan submitted to HUD by January. We don't know how long it's going to take HUD to approve it. We're not aware, no plan in Westchester has been approved yet, and most of the communities haven't submitted theirs yet. But we'd expect that it would probably take HUD months to approve it. Then once we got approval, we could do the local RFP, probably spring or summer. The city could make a quick decision on those. And so the implementation is likely to begin in fall 2023. And the final deadline for final HOME-ARP expenditures, September 2030th. So you could have it by fall of next year. Everything needs to be spent within 7 years, and you could spend it as fast as you needed it, depending on the way you structured your plan. Any questions about that? So this is really the key. Do you have a development in mind? How much money would you like? How many units could you give us? At which general category? Like affordable housing development. And then you could tell us capital, which is easy, or if you want the ongoing funding I need to talk to you to figure out how we do that. But probably for now, what you could say is would like $1 million and would like half of it to be into the 7-year operating support or tenant subsidy, however it's defined in the plan. Because we don't need a lot of detail now. We just need enough detail so the city could decide what range of projects it should craft the plan to be able to accommodate.
Carl, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
Would projects that have already been allocated home funds, could they be entitled to these funds as additional funds?
Yes. Not to cover the same, not
Of
to
course.
duplicate the same expenses, of course, but yes.
A different rationale for funding.
Right.
That's within the defined criteria.
It could reduce the debt of the building. It could add services. It could allow you to take lower income tenants. You'd find a way to show how the money would make a difference.
Thank you.
It's extraordinarily flexible in terms of what you can do and extraordinarily flexible in terms of who you can serve. And you've got a 7-year window to do, which is an enormous amount. The problem is that there are so many different ways to spend that money, but because you're leading developers, we're asking you for specific kinds of suggestions so the city could structure its plan to accommodate as much of that as possible. And the key really is, if you need to narrow that huge potential population, you need to tell us now so the city can decide which of those focus areas it wants to make possible, and I can try to find the language about preferences that would make it possible for any of those selected projects to proceed.
Carl, this is Roger from Conifer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that because these are federal funds, that the same process and applies here in terms of, if it's over 11 units, then it would trigger prevailing wage, and it has to go through the NEPA review process in order for the funds to be allocated.
I don't know the answer.
Yes, it does apply, Carl. Environmentals and home is anything over 11 units. Right, Lou?
It makes sense that it would.
I'm sorry, did he respond? I couldn't hear.
No, he's muted.
Oh.
May have stepped away. So I think you'd assume the answer would be yes. This money was provided to help overcome the effects of the COVID pandemic, but there's no requirement that you tie it to that. You just need to describe, or I need to describe, the need in Yonkers, and specifically the need that we might want to focus on for the various projects. I actually have to describe all the data that I can gather for the extent of the need of all of the parts of all 4 qualifying housing, qualifying populations. And then if we want a preference, I have to say which ones and try to justify that. So it's probably good that if you had a specific project in mind, but you don't need site control or anything like that. You just need, you might say, I'd like $1 million 3 years from now. or 2 to 3 years from now. That would be an option. But you'd need to tell us how many units and which parts of the population or all the populations would you be able to accept. Are all of you familiar with the Empire State Supported Housing Initiative? They come
Yes.
out, they come out every year. And Westchester's been getting like 7 or 8 approved each year. And then you don't have to have site control, but you need to have site control within 2 years now of when the grants are awarded. And if you don't have site control yet, you can reapply and get it again. So the state's trying to create thousands of new units with those. And so that's an option for that ongoing support for 2 of the 4 populations at least. You could ask for this and then apply for the ESHI later.
Could we have this presentation sent to us in a PDF?
Yes,
And will you be doing that?
Albert will, to everybody on the call.
Yes, so I
You'll-
need some of the people I've been private messaging, those who I do not recognize, Krista and Bonnie, and Teresa. I was looking for your RSVPs and I can't find them in my email. So if you can please share your email with me and I'll make sure you get this presentation.
And you get this presentation and then the part that define the populations, that's the actual like 93 pages of HUD guidance establishing this program. So pretty much every technical question you have would be likely to be answered in there. There are a bunch of other fact sheets available for different types of programs, but that would be the starting point that would answer most of your questions. And it's like page 3 to 8 defines the qualifying populations.
If we have multiple projects in Yonkers, can we submit multiple requests?
You could, you'd be sort of competing with yourself because 4.6 million doesn't go very far. And you wouldn't want to spread it over too many units. You wouldn't want to give yourself a very small subsidy over a large number of units, because then you're locking that large number of units into the 15-year commitment to serve the targeted populations. It'd probably be better to ask for a larger amount and then the city, depending on how much it puts into that bucket, when it comes to an RFP, you might not be able to ask for as much as you had hoped for, or you might not get everything you ask for. But it's basically, you want to ask for more money than you're likely to get and define the populations you're willing to serve. And then the city will decide how much to be in that bucket when the RFP comes out. And as long as the populations that you're willing to serve have been defined as an option for the city, then you could proceed then.
Hi, I'm James Simmons. I came on a little late. Question is, can this be used for rehab projects, or is it just new construction?
Preservation or creation of affordable housing is the category.
Okay.
Then HUD will have more specifics in the notice that I'm sending, but it seems like renovation would be fine, especially if it's needed to keep it as affordable housing. There's a special fact sheet on this category of expenditure. I'll add that to the documents that Alba will send you all.
Albert, that was me on Bonnie's computer, so you don't have to worry about that.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So if you're willing to serve these populations, it makes sense for you to ask for this money. It's just if you can't serve them all, if you can serve any of them for 15 years, then getting an extra $500,000, million, 2 million, however much you wind up with, would be a good thing for you. And probably the more interest and potential projects, I would guess that the city would be likely to put more money into the bucket if there are more potential projects that it could be used for.
Okay. So Carl, I think we're all set unless anyone else has any other questions. You'll get an email with the follow-up items that Carl described. Carl, this is our last group, so we're saying this is due on Tuesday. We want to give this group just a little bit, a few more days.
Your call.
Yeah, I think we should make this one for at least the 13th, 1 week. So
Okay.
we'll be changing that to a due date. You're the last group we were meeting with, so we'll make that due date on October 13th. So you have a full week to put your thoughts together.
And then the next date, the data to the 18th?
Yep.
Okay. And again, it could be $1 million, 10 units that would serve blank, blank, and blank. In terms of need data, I don't think you need to wrestle too much with that unless you're proposing a particular population. Like some of the in earlier meetings about TVRA and services, people were talking about very specific populations and needed to sort of prove that they existed. If you say, I'm going to serve homeless, at risk, and domestic violence survivors, don't knock yourself out getting data because I'm going to have that data already. If you're proposing to serve some unique population that wouldn't normally be focused on, then give me the need data.
Sorry, would seniors fall under at risk, low income seniors?
Not based on age, but it could be a subset of those. Like one of the very clear groups is very low income people, 30% or below at AMI, who spend 50% or more on housing costs. You could say that you're going to set aside for seniors who meet that requirement. It's the last two facts to make them eligible for a HOME-ARP, but the fact that they're seniors probably makes it more appealing for the city to fund it. You know, it's like a high political appeal on a clearly eligible population. So that would be a fine combination. But that's something where the HUD lawyers who vetted for discrimination might give us a problem.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's why I asked the question.
So it sounds like part of the way that you can do that is that you would open it to everybody or everyone in that category, regardless of age, but you would give a preference for seniors where they would be chosen first. And then if there were other openings after you ran out of seniors, you could go to other populations. And I believe that was one of the examples of a way that you could do that, where no one is precluded, but some people have a preference. And I'd propose it, the city would decide to include it, and then HUD would vet it, and there might be some back and forth about exactly how that needs to be worded. But that's something we could propose a way to do as a preference. They said, in general, preferences are likely to be allowed. Limitations or exclusions would be vetted very carefully. Like if you said you had to, that you had to be a certain age in order to get in, they'd probably turn it down. But if it was a preference, it might be allowed. So if you wanted to serve people with mental illness, they said you couldn't preclude people with other disabilities. You would need to do, the people who had a need for the services provided by the program would be given priority for the program. So that way you're not excluding anyone, you're doing it based on need for the specific service configuration. So there are ways that we can try to word what the city says I should incorporate from the suggestions y'all propose. Any other questions? We'll get the materials out to you right away. And thank you all. I'm looking forward to a lot of wonderful ideas.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.